Picture yourself in the gaslit shadows of Victorian London, where rain hammers against the skylights of an opulent private gallery, and the very mirrors that should reveal truth become instruments of the most ingenious deception. Tonight, we unravel a mystery so cleverly crafted that even the great Sherlock Holmes must peer beyond the surface to catch a thief who steals not just jewels, but reality itself. Stay with us through this hour-long investigation where nothing is as it seems, and every reflection might be a lie waiting to be exposed. The October rain of 1892 struck the skylights of Lord Pemberton's private gallery like bullets against armor, each drop exploding into tiny crystals that caught the gaslight and scattered it across the polished marble floor. The air itself seemed heavy with anticipation, thick with the scent of metal polish and the cold stone that lined the walls, creating an atmosphere both opulent and suffocating. This was no ordinary evening at the Pemberton estate, for within these mirrored halls lay treasures worth more than most men would see in 10 lifetimes. Velvet carpets swallowed the footfalls of the dozen guests who had gathered for this most exclusive viewing. Lord Pemberton himself, resplendent in his evening wear with chestnut cufflinks gleaming at his wrists, moved through the assembled crowd with the measured confidence of a man who had never known want. His voice, clipped and imperial, cut through the murmur of polite conversation as he called for attention. The centerpiece of tonight's exhibition was the Kashmir Star, a diamond ring of such extraordinary beauty and provenance that it had been insured for a sum that could purchase half of Whitechapel. The ring sat in its sealed display case, surrounded by mirrors that multiplied its brilliance into 1,000 dancing stars. The very air around the case seemed to shimmer with its presence, as if the diamond's radiance had somehow become tangible. But Lord Pemberton's triumph would be short-lived. Within minutes of unveiling his prized possession to the assembled guests, the unthinkable occurred. The lights flickered once, twice, as if the storm outside had briefly touched the heart of the estate's electrical system. When the illumination steadied, gasps of horror filled the gallery. The Kashmir Star had vanished, leaving behind only an empty velvet cushion and a mystery that would soon draw the attention of London's greatest detective. The locked-room nature of the theft seemed absolute. Every entrance had been monitored, every guest accounted for, and yet the diamond had simply ceased to exist within its sealed case. As Lord Pemberton's rage alternated with wounded pride, his security staff grew defensive, their explanations growing more desperate by the minute. The discreet curator, normally so careful and measured in his movements, now appeared overly anxious, his hands trembling as he attempted to examine the empty case. Most telling of all was the silent house manager, who radiated tension like heat from a forge, his keys jangling on their braided lanyard as he watched entrances more intently than people. Into this chaos stepped Sherlock Holmes, summoned by telegram and arriving with his characteristic brisk efficiency. Dr. Watson, as always, remained at his side, prepared to document what would surely prove to be another testament to his friend's extraordinary deductive abilities. Holmes surveyed the scene with eyes that missed nothing, his gaze moving from the empty case to the assembled suspects with the precision of a surgeon's blade. Holmes approached the violated display case with his distinctive analytical calm. He produced a small hand mirror from his coat pocket and breathed upon the glass of the case, his eyes studying the patterns that emerged in the condensation. With delicate precision, he traced finger arcs that had been invisible to the untrained eye, then tapped gently around the case's frame, listening for variations in sound that might indicate tampering. What caught his attention most was not what was present, but what was missing. The case's hinges bore hairline abrasions that were almost imperceptible, yet to Holmes's trained eye, they told a story of careful manipulation. But it was the discovery of a single flake of mirror backing on the carpet beneath the display that caused the detective's eyes to narrow with interest. This was no crude smash-and-grab theft, but rather an elaborate optical misdirection that spoke of considerable planning and technical skill. As Holmes began his preliminary examination, the assembled cast of characters revealed themselves through their nervous habits and unconscious tells. Lord Pemberton, despite his outward fury, bore the tension of a man with secrets of his own, his fingers drumming against his chestnut cufflinks in a rhythm that suggested financial pressures he dared not voice. The head of security, a weathered man with a scar along his jaw, drummed his fingers in a rigid pattern whenever questioned about the evening's events, a tell that Holmes filed away for future consideration. Don't miss a single clue as we dive deeper into this mystery. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, because this investigation is about to take turns you won't see coming. The curator moved through the gallery with the careful precision of one accustomed to handling priceless artifacts. A soft bristle brush always within reach, his eyes lingering on frames rather than their contents. Yet there was something in his manner that suggested guilt, though whether for the theft itself or some other transgression remained to be determined. The house manager's constant vigilance over entrances, his keys creating a subtle musical accompaniment to his movements, spoke of a man who knew more about the evening's events than he was willing to reveal. Among the guests, one figure stood out for his careful detachment from the drama unfolding around them. This rival collector, whose cologne carried notes of dark tobacco, smiled with his lips while his eyes remained calculating and cold. His gaze, Holmes noted, consistently avoided the empty ring stand, instead focusing on the skylight trusses above and the complex arrangement of mirrors that surrounded the display. The geography of the crime scene presented its own mysteries. The private gallery's skylight arrangement created natural shadows that shifted with the storm clouds above, while mirrored columns positioned throughout the space created sightline traps that could confuse even the most observant witness. An antechamber connected to a staff corridor provided discreet access routes, while a freight lift offered potential means of moving large objects undetected. Most intriguingly, an external terrace with wet slate flagstones showed signs of recent traffic despite the storm. As Holmes methodically cataloged the physical evidence, several concrete clues emerged from his investigation. A minute scratch, perfectly concentric to the display case's lower hinge pin, suggested the case had been opened with professional precision rather than forced. Silica dust found near the base of the display was inconsistent with the gallery's marble construction, hinting at materials brought from elsewhere. Most compelling was a damp footprint pattern by the terrace door that matched none of the guests' footwear recorded in the evening's check-in log. The discovery of a misplaced desiccant packet beneath a bronze sculpture added another layer to the mystery. Such packets were not standard equipment for ring displays, yet their presence suggested someone had been concerned about humidity and condensation, factors that could affect visibility and reflections within the gallery's mirrored environment. Time was not on Holmes's side. An insurance auditor was scheduled to arrive at dawn, and Lord Pemberton had made clear his intention to shut down the estate and trigger arrests by morning if the Kashmir Star was not recovered. The pressure mounting on all parties created an atmosphere where truth and deception danced as closely as partners in a waltz. The first logical shock came when Holmes examined the alarm system's tamper log. Rather than showing a disturbance during the guest's presence, the electronic records indicated a spike in activity before any visitors had arrived at the estate. This contradiction suggested that the theft window was not as straightforward as it initially appeared, and that the crime had been orchestrated with intimate knowledge of the estate's security systems. As Holmes delved deeper into the testimonies of those present, contradictions began to emerge like cracks in a carefully constructed facade. The head of security maintained absolute certainty about continuous camera coverage throughout the evening, his scarred jaw set with the determination of a man whose reputation depended on his vigilance. Yet the curator's account painted a different picture, insisting that the cameras had been cycled offline briefly for routine lens cleaning, a procedure he claimed to have personally supervised. Most puzzling was the house manager's claim that a storm surge had caused a momentary flicker in the electrical system, an event that none of the other witnesses could recall. His keys jangled more urgently as he recounted this supposed power interruption, and Holmes noted how his eyes darted toward the skylights as he spoke, as if expecting another surge at any moment. The behavioral evidence proved as telling as the physical clues. The rival collector's studied indifference to the empty ring stand contrasted sharply with his obvious fascination with the gallery's skylight trusses and their relationship to the mirrored columns. The curator's reluctance to touch any of the mirror frames, despite his professional duty to maintain the gallery's displays, suggested either superstition or guilty knowledge. Meanwhile, Lord Pemberton's increasingly detailed explanations of the Kashmir Star's provenance felt less like prideful boasting and more like a man attempting to establish ownership of something whose history might be questionable. Holmes's methodical examination revealed two crucial pieces of evidence that would later prove pivotal to solving the case. First, a thin residue of anti-fog compound on the inner surface of the display case glass, a substance that was not part of the standard preparation protocol for exhibitions. This chemical signature suggested someone had anticipated the need to maintain clear visibility through the glass despite changes in humidity or temperature. Second, pressed between the pages of the guest ledger was a single carnation petal, its surface still carrying the faint scent of dark tobacco cologne that Holmes had noticed on the rival collector. The placement was too precise to be accidental, yet its significance remained tantalizingly unclear. Holmes recreated the sight lines within the gallery using his hand mirror, counting heartbeats to map the patrol loops of the security staff and identifying blind spots in the surveillance coverage. This methodical reconstruction revealed that the mirrored columns, while intended to eliminate hiding places, actually created complex optical illusions that could confuse both human observers and mechanical recording devices. All evidence appeared to point toward the rival collector as the most likely perpetrator of the theft. His nervous behavior, the botanical evidence linking him to the scene, and his obvious knowledge of the gallery's layout seemed to create an unassailable case. Yet Holmes's satisfaction with this solution was short-lived. A careful examination of the valet's time-stamped car key log placed the suspect in the estate's driveway, engaged in a lengthy telephone call at the precise moment when the cashmere star must have been stolen. This contradiction forced Holmes to reconsider his entire approach to the mystery. The first major turn in the investigation came with the realization that the desiccant packet found beneath the bronze sculpture matched the type used in the freight lift's crate liners rather than those employed in display cases. This detail suggested that the theft had somehow leveraged the estate's cargo handling systems rather than relying solely on access to the exhibition gallery. More disturbing was Holmes's discovery that someone had quietly recalibrated the security camera's focus depth to blur reflections at precisely 3 meters, the exact distance between the mirrored columns and the cashmere star's display case. This sabotage had been performed with such subtlety that the security staff remained unaware of the compromise, creating a blind spot that existed only in reflection while maintaining apparent coverage of the display itself. The locked room mystery began to dissolve as Holmes recognized the true nature of the deception. Rather than being stolen from a secured space, the cashmere star had likely been removed through a combination of optical substitution and prepositioned decoy elements. The mirrors that should have made theft impossible had instead been turned into instruments of misdirection, creating false images that fooled both human observers and mechanical surveillance. As the implications of this revelation sank in, the human drama within the estate intensified. Lord Pemberton's threats to dismiss his entire security staff created an atmosphere of panic among the servants, while the curator trembled at the thought of public disgrace and professional ruin. The house manager pleaded desperately to keep the staff's names out of the press, his loyalty to his fellow employees evident even as suspicion fell upon one of their number. Holmes adjusted his investigative approach, implementing subtle tests designed to reveal the guilty party through their unconscious behaviors. He requested that each suspect carry the cashmere star's empty display stand across the gallery, observing their grip patterns, wrist tension, and chosen routes through the mirrored space. These seemingly innocent requests would later prove crucial in identifying the perpetrator's familiarity with the gallery's optical properties. The psychology of the crime became clearer as Holmes identified a compulsive need to control sightlines and reflections in one of the suspects. This behavioral pattern, barely perceptible to casual observation, linked directly to a method of theft that relied on staged reflections and carefully manipulated mirror angles. The plot thickens beyond anything you could imagine. If you're enjoying this intricate mystery, hit that like button and let us know in the comments which suspect you think is guilty. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. As the investigation deepened, additional complications emerged that threatened to derail Holmes's careful deductions. Lord Pemberton's recent financial difficulties, including a liquidity crisis that had forced him to quietly use the cashmere star as collateral for a substantial loan, cast new doubt on the circumstances surrounding the theft. A family trust clause that imposed severe penalties for negligence in safeguarding heirloom pieces added another layer of motive that could apply to multiple parties. The arrival of insurance counsel demanding immediate statements from all witnesses created additional pressure, choking the natural flow of Holmes's interviews and threatening to expose the investigation's findings before the detective was ready to spring his trap. Legal considerations began to take precedence over truth-seeking, forcing Holmes to work within increasingly narrow parameters. A red herring emerged in the form of a pawn ticket found in one of the staff members' quarters, suggesting petty theft of a lesser gem from the collection. However, the timing of this transaction preceded the evening's events by several days, indicating a separate crime that, while morally reprehensible, was unrelated to the Kashmir Star's disappearance. The curator's private confession to Holmes revealed the depth of fear and guilt that permeated the estate's staff. He admitted to having taken shortcuts in conservation work, fearing that his professional reputation would not survive public scrutiny of his methods. His request for protection spoke to a vulnerability that Holmes recognized could be exploited by the true perpetrator of the theft. Holmes faced an ethical dilemma in balancing empathy against the effectiveness of his investigation. The curator's fragile emotional state made him both a valuable witness and a potential liability, requiring delicate handling that preserved his cooperation while maintaining the integrity of the evidence he might provide. Hints of a previous staged loss at another estate began to emerge, suggesting that the theft of the Kashmir Star might not be an isolated incident, but rather part of a larger pattern of crimes committed by someone with intimate knowledge of high-end security systems and human psychology. The escalation of the mystery reached a critical point when Holmes identified the convergence of three seemingly unrelated pieces of evidence: the camera's deliberately shifted focus, the mirror backing flakes found on the carpet, and the anti-fog residue on the display case glass. Together, these clues outlined a sophisticated method of theft that relied on reflection control and decoy substitution rather than traditional breaking and entering techniques. A shocking discovery occurred when the freight lift jammed during Holmes's investigation, revealing a lined crate that bore condensation rings matching the base dimensions of the Kashmir Star's display case exactly. This physical evidence provided the missing link between the gallery's exhibition space and the estate's cargo handling systems, explaining how the stolen diamond could have been moved without detection. The ticking clock intensified as preparations began for a charity gala scheduled for noon the following day. This event would flood the estate with hundreds of additional visitors, contaminating the crime scene and making it virtually impossible to preserve the trace evidence that Holmes needed to prove his case. As Holmes wove together the various threads of evidence and motive, he began to understand how the estate's institutional pressures had created the perfect environment for an inside job. The billionaire's financial volatility, while not directly connected to the theft's execution, had created an atmosphere of desperation that made desperate measures seem reasonable to someone with access and opportunity. The resolution of the pawnshop red herring taught Holmes important lessons about the difference between opportunistic petty crime and carefully orchestrated major theft. The staff member's minor transgression, while ethically problematic, lacked the sophistication and planning evident in the Kashmir Star's disappearance. Holmes established surveillance routes connecting the mirrored column positions, staff corridor access points, and the external terrace, recruiting a reluctant accomplice from among the staff to signal with predetermined cloth movements should anyone attempt to access these areas during his reconstruction of the crime. The investigation reached its critical point as Holmes developed a complete working hypothesis that answered all the fundamental questions of the mystery. The identity of the perpetrator had crystallized around an insider with routine access to both the gallery and its security systems, someone whose professional duties provided cover for the specialized knowledge required to execute such an elaborate deception. The method involved a complex orchestration of mirror-backed sleight of hand, deliberate manipulation of camera focus settings, the use of decoy glass elements, and an escape route through the freight lift system. The timing had been carefully coordinated to coincide with the pre-guest preparation period, when a storm-related electrical flicker could mask the brief window needed to complete the substitution. The motive combined hidden financial pressure with fear of exposure for previous professional failings, creating a psychological state where extreme measures seemed like the only available option. The tools employed included anti-fog compounds, industrial desiccants, and pre-cut glass elements that had been prepared well in advance of the actual theft. Holmes identified the perpetrator's fatal flaw in their compulsive need to maintain perfect sightlines and mirror alignments. This behavioral tic, barely noticeable under normal circumstances, became glaringly obvious when the individual was placed under pressure to recreate their actions. The evidence was minutes away from contamination as the estate's staff began preparations for the charity gala, creating an urgent need for Holmes to spring his trap before the crime scene was irreparably compromised. Holmes devised an elegant trap that would force the perpetrator to reveal themselves through their own expertise. A staged reinstallation of the display case under dimmed skylights and carefully controlled humidity conditions recreated the exact environmental factors present during the original theft. The culprit would be unable to resist correcting the mirror alignments and optical angles needed to maintain their illusion. The roles were carefully divided among Holmes's allies. Dr. Watson monitored the freight corridor for any attempted escape. The reluctant staff accomplice prompted routine maintenance checklists that would require the perpetrator to access the mirrored areas, and Holmes himself documented every hand movement and behavioral tell that might provide legal proof of guilt. The signature element that would ultimately doom the perpetrator was their habit of working with cloth-wrapped hands to avoid leaving fingerprints, combined with an obsessive need to align reflections to exact angles before touching any surface. These professional habits, developed over years of handling valuable artifacts, became the very evidence that would convict them. As the trap was sprung, the perpetrator almost escaped through a combination of quick thinking and intimate knowledge of the estate's layout. The house manager's attempt to shadow their movements in the corridor was anticipated, forcing a detour toward the external terrace and a desperate attempt to reach the freight lift before being cornered. An unexpected power fluctuation scrambled the electric lighting at the crucial moment, forcing Holmes to improvise with only a pocket lens and a match flame to track breath condensation patterns on the glass surfaces. This improvisation would prove crucial in documenting the final piece of evidence needed to secure a conviction. The maximum tension arrived as Holmes froze the action in a freeze-frame moment of truth, with the perpetrator's hand caught in the act of aligning a mirror while reaching for the freight lift's control key. The convergence of physical evidence, behavioral patterns, and opportunity created an inescapable web of proof that even the most skilled criminal could not escape. The climax of the investigation brought together all elements of Holmes's deductive methodology in a symphony of logic and observation. The physical evidence formed an unbreakable chain: mirror-backing residue on the perpetrator's gloves, anti-fog compound traces on their cuffs, and the cashmere star itself, discovered nested in a decoy velvet roll hidden within the seam of a freight lift crate. The behavioral evidence proved equally compelling, as the perpetrator's compulsive frame aligning during the reenactment revealed their inability to suppress professional habits even under extreme stress. Their intimate knowledge of camera focus cycles and corridor key schedules could only have belonged to someone with authorized access to the estate's security protocols. The fatal flaw that ultimately exposed the thief was their pride in creating perfect sightlines and optical illusions. Even when caught in Holmes's trap, they could not resist correcting the mirror angle that would expose their hiding place, choosing professional perfectionism over personal freedom. The environmental factors that Holmes had so carefully orchestrated played their part as drafts from the external terrace, and precisely timed humidifier bursts created fog patterns that revealed breath arcs at the exact locations where the decoy glass panes had been positioned during the original theft. The emotional truth behind the crime proved as important as the mechanical details. The scheme had sprung not from simple greed, but from a complex mixture of fear, professional pride, and financial desperation. The perpetrator's terror of exposure for previous career mistakes, combined with mounting debts and the pressure of maintaining a lifestyle beyond their means, had created a psychological state where elaborate deception seemed preferable to honest admission of failure. Lord Pemberton was forced to confront his own complicity in creating the conditions that made the theft possible. His neglect of proper security protocols, combined with his use of the cashmere star as undisclosed loan collateral, had created vulnerabilities that a more scrupulous property owner might have avoided. The resolution of the case brought measured justice rather than dramatic courtroom scenes. Legal action was surgical and precisely targeted, focusing on the specific crimes committed rather than attempting to destroy lives unnecessarily. The curator, whose fears had made him a reluctant witness, kept his position under probationary supervision, his professional reputation intact despite his earlier shortcuts. The house manager, whose loyalty to the estate had been compromised by personal financial pressures, departed quietly with a reference that acknowledged his years of service while omitting the circumstances of his leaving. The rival collector, cleared of suspicion but not of gossip, found his social standing diminished by association with the scandal. The empty ring stand, once a symbol of devastating loss and professional failure, was transformed in Holmes's final analysis into a reminder of the dangers inherent in mistaking surface appearance for underlying truth. The mirrors that had been turned into instruments of deception were restored to their proper function, reflecting reality rather than creating illusions. Holmes's final observation cut to the heart of the matter with characteristic insight. Which represented the greater deception, the thief's elaborate mirror trick, or the estate's long-standing habit of mistaking polish and presentation for genuine substance and security? The case of the Kashmir Star would be remembered not just for its technical brilliance, but for its revelation of the human costs associated with maintaining appearances at the expense of truth. In the gaslit halls of Victorian London, where shadows and reflections danced together in eternal partnership, Sherlock Holmes had once again proven that no deception, however cleverly crafted, could ultimately withstand the patient application of logic, observation, and human understanding. If you've been captivated by this intricate tale of mirrors and deception, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another mystery. Drop a comment below and let us know what you thought of Holmes's brilliant deduction. And don't forget to watch our next video where we'll unravel another case that will challenge everything you think you know about crime and punishment in Victorian London. The game, as they say, is always afoot.